This week on A Lively Experiment, winter is right around the corner. What is the state doing to expand its base of shelter beds? And a former Rhode Island politician runs for the presidency, but it ends before it really gets off the ground.
A Lively Experiment is generously underwritten by...
Hi, I'm John Hazen White Jr. For over 30 years, A Lively Experiment has provided insight and analysis of the political issues that face Rhode Islanders. I'm a proud supporter of this great program and Rhode Island PBS.
Joining us with their insights, attorney and former Providence Mayor Angel Taveras, Sue Cienki, National Committeewoman and former chair of the Rhode Island Republican Party, and Boston Globe reporter Ed Fitzpatrick. And welcome to this week's Lively. I'm Jim Hummel. It is great to have you with us. Columbus Day means that cold weather is right around the corner, and that will be a challenge for people who don't have a place to live. The state has added more shelter beds, but homeless advocates say they are still hundreds short of the need, while construction of affordable housing is still months, if not years away. Angel, this seems to be a perennial problem, and I think what we found is money can't fix all the problems. We have more money than we've ever had, but we're still a ways from solving it.
Well, there are two things with this, Jim. I think that one, it's really good that it's a priority and that we're focusing on it, that we have the funds to do it. But it takes time to build and it takes time to expand. And we've had more people join, unfortunately, become homeless, and so you have more need. The second part is that the homes aren't enough. You really need services. It really, a lot of the folks are homeless. They have underlying issues that you have to address. And so it's not enough to simply build a home or to put them up in a hotel. It's also about how you deal with those underlying issues to help them overcome them. And that's not an easy thing to do. And we see that the challenge continues to exist.
And your successor is in a tough place. Any mayor of a city, there's that balance between public safety, and I know Mayor Smiley's gotten a little bit of grief about moving some people out of homeless encampments, but in some cases you can't have people living in certain places.
Look, we went through the situation with the Occupy Providence there, and we had to ultimately come to an agreement. We were fortunate to have the Catholic Diocese help us reach an agreement so that we didn't have to use force. But you have to do something. You can't have that for lots of reasons. So it's very easy to criticize. It's not as easy to propose solutions. And Mayor Smiley, I think, is doing the best that he can with a very difficult situation. But you can't have it for health reasons, safety reasons. And so there's a lot that you have to do. And I think that the governor and the city are working as hard as they can with advocates to try to get more beds as quickly as possible.
Yeah, when we talk about affordable housing, we all understand that in Rhode Island, nothing is affordable. We saw Senator Sam Bell speak to $4,000 rents in Rhode Island and in Providence. That's just not sustainable. So our policies and procedures that we are putting in place are really not sustainable. But I agree with Angel here when he said it's a multifaceted problem. It's not just about building homes. It's about what are you going to do with services? Because you can place people in homes, but if they have a mental illness, they may try to escape for whatever reason. And the drug abuse, if somebody has an addiction, what are we doing? Right now, what are we doing? We're giving, safe injection sites, but no treatment plan after that. No, we'll give you a place to shoot up drugs, but we're not going to give you the facility to try to get off of your addiction. So it is a multifaceted problem. They're trying to address it. We do have a lot of money. It should be a priority. It gets cold here. I mean, maybe that should be the sign. Welcome to Rhode Island. It's cold here. Because it does get cold.
Can we say that you agree with Senator Bell on one thing? Is that a first now on Lively that you agree with Senator Bell?
I actually tweeted
that might
out
be the
at
headline.
Him, that he's right. It's not affordable. What is affordable? The taxes are high. The cost of living is high. Inflation is out of control. So there's going to be a lot more homeless people than what they anticipate is only 562. There'll be more.
Sure.
Yeah, I thought it was good that the Housing Secretary, Stephen Pryor, announced that there's going to be 25% more beds this year. It was 1,000 last year, so maybe about 250 more beds. That's good, but I think we all know that's not going to meet the need. Advocates say it's not going to meet the need. The housing crisis in Rhode Island and elsewhere is severe. And there are still options out there that haven't been pursued, haven't been achieved at least. Like the advocates for years have been calling for use of the pallet homes, the modular homes that can be erected really quickly. And there's been local opposition. There hasn't been political will to make that happen. And Pryor said he's looking for locations, but that needs to happen. I mean, that's an easy solution that they could do today.
Yeah, and there was a whole package that Speaker McCarthy, we'll get to him in a second. Speaker Cienki, I got competing things in my head. Speaker Cienki did about you run into a problem with some of the local communities. What Ed said about relaxing some of the things. So I think, look, it's simple supply and demand. If we had a lot more housing available, then the prices potentially could drop or either level off. But isn't that a problem that a lot of the cities and towns are like, well, not in my backyard. I don't want some of this built.
I mean, that is a perennial problem, not only for that, but for other economic development, for jobs. It's a problem all the time. I think that what we have, though, with the speaker and Governor McKee and the secretary and the mayors, I think you do have a much more of a focus on this issue because one, I think there's funding, so that kind of solves one part of it. Now you've got the political will to do it, and you've got to execute on it. I think Ed's idea and talking about the modular homes, that could be a very good solution. You got to find a place for it, but that could be a very good solution to address it during this winter specifically.
But when you talk about some communities rejecting some of these developments, it's not just we don't want the developments here, it's we don't have the services to be able to support these people if they come here. Take it, for example, Foster. I mean, you have land out there, but there's no bus transportation to get there. So if these people are homeless and there's no jobs there for them to get out of the situation, that's also an issue. So is RIPTA going to provide bus services if you place them in certain communities?
The other thing that stunned me was Crossroads. They had a story in today's Journal. We're taping on a Thursday. Crossroads said they're trying to privately fundraise the last $15 million for construction costs. Now, I know you can't give it all to Crossroads, but you have 3 developments in the pipeline. Where is all this $250 million? I know probably the state committed some of it, but that stunned me when I said they've got to go out and ask for private funding when we have all this federal and state money sloshing around.
Yeah, you're right. $250 million was put aside for housing and homelessness. But when the state officials have said that they're going to spread that out, I think they've got 22 projects announced last year. But some of the projects will need to tap some private funding to make it happen. So yeah, the bottom line doesn't always add up there.
Okay. Ed, let me stay with you. Familiar name in Rhode Island, but not across the country. Steve Laffey, the former mayor of Cranston who ran for Senate years ago against Sheldon Whitehouse. He has now an aborted run for president. You wrote about this, and what's interesting to me, Steve Laffey's always been an interesting character. I think he addressed some of the things that a lot of people don't want to talk about, is Social Security, Medicare, and the debt. He said not only is he abandoning it, but he's leaving the Republican Party.
Yeah, he really emphasized that he's been a Republican since he was 14. He's
I would have loved to see little teenage Steve Laffey out there with the cut spending.
But he called the Republican Party a laughingstock these days, and I think he focused a lot of his ire on former President Trump, and he was one of the few people to criticize Trump when he mocked the woman who won that sexual harassment suit against them up at the St. Anselm's CNN town hall, and he really lashed out at him then. I mean, Chris Christie's been critical of Trump too, but was very critical of Trump, and he announced that he was leaving the party and dropping out of the race 2 days after the Globe and Suffolk University came out with a poll showing Trump so far ahead in the presidential primary, and Laffey didn't even register, and he struggled to raise funds there. So I think he also realized he didn't stand a chance.
What about some of his comments about the Republican Party nationally?
Steve, when he first got into the race, he's a smart guy. He's been in politics in Rhode Island, but he has no name recognition nationally. I mean, he moved to Colorado. He attempted to run against Ken Buck, who was the sitting congressman out there. Smart guy again, but in order to run a national race, you need name recognition and you need money. Vivek Ramaswamy, who's running, threw $10 million of his own dollars in there. What that afforded Vivek to do is to put a team in place, to get communications people, to get policy people, to get your name out there. Steve didn't do that. He didn't reach into his own pocket to try to fund his own case, and really didn't even want to sign a data agreement with the Republicans in order to access the data that we have. So some of the things that he's complaining about are his own fault. But I think he's a smart guy. He does point out certain things from a financial standpoint that need to be addressed, and we cannot kick the can down the road any longer. He did have some important things to say, but I think a lot of it is sour grapes.
Well, I actually think you pointed out good points about the Republican Party and about former President Trump. The Republican Party now is barely recognizable. They used to be against Russia, but many of them don't support Ukraine. They used to be for law enforcement, yet you hear them talking about wanting to defund the FBI. I think that history is going to record this moment as a very unique moment in our history, and not in a good way. And so I think that he's right when he talks about the Republican Party and when he talks about President Trump. And I give him credit for speaking out against President Trump, because there are so many Republicans who I think actually know better, but they're afraid to speak out against them.
Yeah.
So.
Ed and we were talking in the green room beforehand. Laffey's talking about stuff that really is going to come home to roost for our kids and grandkids. All of the spending, whoever you want to blame to get into it, that we're not bringing things under control. But that really doesn't resonate with a lot of people, because that's tomorrow's problem, right? It's what we've been talking about with pensions in Rhode Island for years.
Yeah,
right?
He raised a lot of the financial issues, Social Security, and that being sustainable for the future. But he never made it to the debate stage, so and he wasn't going to, so that he wasn't going to get a chance to discuss that at all.
While we're talking nationally, Sue, we're taping on a Thursday. They're having a hard time picking a House Speaker, and that kind of puts the country, not only the Republicans, in a tough spot. So I wonder, as you look from your national committee woman, but you've been a former chairwoman, you've been a Republican your whole life. What do you think about what's going on in Washington now and the direction that the House is going in?
Chaos, unnecessarily chaos. Just the Speaker of McCarthy's election, that was chaotic. And now they've thrown it into chaos again. I don't want to hear any of the Democrats complaining about that, because they had a chance to support Kevin McCarthy, who was trying to work in a bipartisan fashion to try to get things done. Nancy Pelosi has been rumored to say that's never going to happen. They're not going to take away your speakership because I care about the institution. Well, she didn't. They could have jumped. Some of the Democrats could have jumped and saved McCarthy, but they didn't. But now it's just chaos. The two leading candidates are Steve Scalise and Representative Jim Jordan. It looks like it may be Steve Scalise. I worry about them not getting behind one person, because we really need
because if they had the support, he probably would have been voted in already, right? They got to delay the vote while they count the heads.
Yeah, they got to count the heads. They got to count the votes. So I imagine it's going to end up being Steve Scalise at this point.
Yeah, it's just not good nationally for us, though, and I think it makes us look weak overseas. People are like, what's this great democracy you have and you can't even elect a leader?
Well, I think it makes us doesn't make us look good overseas or here as well. I mean, this is a time where we need really to come together. And I think that you've seen with the Republicans, I actually agree with Sue. She's agreed with Sam Bell, and now I'm agreeing with her.
It's a big show.
And I'll say that is chaotic, but I also think a lot of that is caused not by Democrats, but by the Republicans themselves. So,
but a small, you have the eight,
small.
right? The gang of eight, maybe the other gang of eight, right?
Right. It's a small group of people that have very strict ideas.
They just seem to want to blow it up.
Well, just strict ideas of trying to control what happens in, I guess, the swamp. You call the swamp D.C. What happens. I always view politics as it's a game of compromise. So there's going to be a right side, a left side, and you have to come together and work together. This group doesn't believe that, I think. I think that they just believe that this is the way it should be done. And you really have to work together with people to accomplish anything.
And for this all to be happening, given all that's happening in the world right now, it's never a good time, I think, not to have a House Speaker, but with Hamas and Israel, with the Ukraine and Russia, there's a lot to pay attention to right now.
And don't forget China and Taiwan.
And China and Taiwan.
That's the trifecta. So we really got to come together as a country and figure out what we're doing. Because, if anybody was watching the news, you saw the leader of Hamas come out and say, the 13th. Let's go strike America.
Exactly.
So, we have to be careful about what's going on in the country.
Let's stay with you, Sue. The CD1 race has been very quiet. Gary Leonard, the Republican nominee, and Gabe Amo, they're eventually going to do 2 debates. Gary Leonard wanted a lot more. I understand why Gabe Amo is not that much. I would think maybe 5 or 6 would have served. Talk about your candidate. A lot of people don't know him yet and actually aren't going to get to know him on a statewide level because Mr. Amo is refusing to do more debates.
Right, and that's unfortunate. I think that the constituents lose out when you don't have debates. I know that Gabe Amo participated in several during the Democratic primary, but there were so many candidates on the Democratic side that you really don't get an opportunity to really stand out in a way because you get 2 minutes, it's quick. When you have one-on-one, when it's the Republican against the Democrat, certainly you can delve more into the issues, you can understand where they stand. And we saw Gabe Amo up with one member of the squad. He was up with Anna Presley, talking about getting money from her constituency, and she supports Hamas. So it's really important for the voters in CD1 to understand who they're voting for. Gary Leonard is certainly a 30-year career military guy. He has a lot of experience in leadership. He understands foreign policy. And at a time when the world is falling apart, he certainly is a superior candidate.
Well, we geek out on all of the policy stuff and we listen to the debates, but I think it rings hollow for Gabe Amo to say, people know where I stand. People didn't know who you were 5 months ago. So this whole, I debated who was paying attention in August to primary debates other than us.
Yeah, I loved all those primaries. I mean, maybe that's just me, but I thought all these different groups were able to bring in candidates and ask them about the issues they cared about, and you got to hear them think on their feet. You got to see where they stood on all these different issues during the primary, and there's not so many now in the general election. I wish there were more. There's going to be 2 televised debates later on. We're going to have Amo and Leonard on the Rhode Island Report podcast next week and ask them separately and ask them about the same questions to each of them, so it'll show the differences, I think, on the important issues. But yeah, I think the more voters know going into the ballot, going into Election Day, the better off we are.
I understand why he's doing this politically, but what's he worried about in this race, right?
Yeah, it's, reality is it's a D+29 district. I used to call it the Cicilline Protection District. It was so gerrymandered, heavily favored Democratic, as opposed to CD2, which is a split district. So what's he worried about? Come out and tell the people who you are.
Well, he is debating twice, so that's the first thing. He is debating twice on television, and he's also going on, and Ed just told you as well, he's out there. So he is actually going on television, giving people a chance to see him. It will be one-on-one, and it'll be a lot longer, so to speak, in terms of opportunity to speak to the public than the debates in the primary where you had so many people. So,
but if you were the candidate, you've run for CD. You ran for CD too.
Yeah, but
many years ago. Wouldn't you do more debates?
You do as many debates as you can. But in Gabe's situation, he's done a lot of debates in the primary. He's now going to do several TV debates. Which is important as well. And I think that people will make a decision based on that. Politically, he's much better known, or is it like Sue said, it's a D+29 district, if that's the number she used. So obviously, he is trying to give the public an opportunity to see him both, but also not necessarily give his opponent extra publicity, because most people don't know who his opponent is.
Yeah, and most people don't know who Gabe Amo is either. Let's face it, when the number of people that were running in the Democratic primary, we all probably thought it was going to be Sabina Matos or Aaron Ruggenberg because they had name recognition. He kind of was a sleeper behind there. People may not understand that he's been working for the Biden administration, so the policies and procedures that are in place now that people are complaining about, he owns those. He is a yes vote for the Democrats. They didn't really, I think the DNC didn't really like Aaron Mergenberg. Sabina killed herself with the signature fiasco with the Board of Elections. So Aaron was the one to beat then. I think the DNC came behind him. He has heavy money from the pharmaceutical industry and from Wall Street. That's who they're voting for if they vote for Gabe Amo.
It is a very blue district, 46% Democratic, 42% independent, unaffiliated, and just 12% Republican. So, yeah, Amo stands a very good chance.
And you also, a year ago, you were talking about elections workers leaving. There's a the news peg on this is Bob Raposo, the longtime elections board head. He's announced he's retiring in 2024. And elections have come under attack. I think in Rhode Island we do a pretty good job, but there's questions nationwide. This is a critical time to pick somebody who's going to be, he's the administrator, he's not the board of elections. Yeah. But what should they be looking for when they go out to hire somebody?
Yeah, the context I wrote about how a quarter of the top election officials in Rhode Island had left since 2020. You know, they've been facing a lot of criticism with President Trump saying, you know, the elections were rigged and everything like that, and they've faced a lot of questions at the local board of canvassers, a lot of pressures that hadn't been to that degree in the past. So, you know, I think that the next election administrator is going to have to be someone who has to build that trust with the electorate, be able to communicate about it, know about cybersecurity, perhaps be bilingual, and deal with all the different ways that voting is taking place now with mail ballots and early voting. You know, I think Bob Raposo was, you know, really did some good work coming in after the prior administrator and having the elections run smoothly. But, you know, looking forward, I think you need someone who's going to be able to deal with all those the new dynamics in elections.
What do you think, Angel?
Well, I think that I've appeared before the election board for over 20 years. And I want people to know out there that the progress that's been made over the last 20 years is tremendous in terms of the work of the election board, the Board of Elections, the Secretary of State, local election officials. Elections aren't perfect. Certainly that's the case. They're not perfect, but we run very good elections here in Rhode Island. We also have post-election audits, which allow us to really make sure that the ballots cast, or the ballots were read the right way. So I think the next person is going to be someone who can address all of the challenges that we have. And some of that is about the national conversation on elections, because there's some people who refuse to accept election results, even though they've had 60 plus cases in the courts about it. And I think that the next person needs to understand how important it is to gain the confidence, understand how important it is that we have paper ballots, and making sure that we continue with our audits, making sure that we hold our vendors accountable when appropriate. And I say that because I know what we went through with some of the issues regarding some of the programming of the machines. So it's going to be someone who can really understand elections, can engender confidence, can also speak to the public about it. And I want to say in terms of Mr. Raposo, who I've known for a long time, I think Bob, and I didn't agree with everything, but I think Bob did a very good job and has been really a public servant for well over 20 years.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing, the BOE does a very good job of inviting the public in to watch the process. You know, when you talk about the audit that they did after the presidential election, you can actually go in and witness that.
You can sit with John Marion.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, there were two people there, me and John Marion.
There you go.
You know, so I say to people, that's not enough. If you want to criticize the process, you have to participate in the process. You know, we do a job of trying to recruit poll watchers, you know, that you can come in and watch the process. Well, in 2020, we had 40, 60 people that came in. In 2022, we had 460. So every precinct, there were people watching the process. And the more people that get involved in the process, the more confidence you're going to have in the process, that you can see what happens. You know, from my perspective, maybe the biggest thing about the elections is let's make sure we have clean voter rolls. When you have clean voter rolls, you're not going to have dead people signing because they're not going to be on your voter rolls any longer. It would eliminate a lot of the issues that people complain about. So start with clean voter rolls, and then move on.
Yeah, but let's be clear about something, and that is there's no evidence of dead people voting here in Rhode Island. And even in, I think, Atlanta, I think there was, or in Georgia, maybe like 2. And sometimes people can vote before they die because they have early voting and other things.
And state law is a little unclear about whether you count that or not.
Right. So that's the other thing. But I think that Sue actually touched on something very important. In Rhode Island, and I think other places, but I'll talk about Rhode Island, you have a right, and Sue, as the head of the Republican Party, former head of the Republican Party.
Not in charge anymore.
But they can have poll watchers at the polls under state law that has a right to be there throughout the process, can actually challenge voters who go and vote, and if they think that they're not the person that they say that they are. So you actually have people there. Campaigns can have people there as well, right? Candidates can as well. So there's a lot going on there. We have signatures that we compare. We have signatures on ballot applications, signatures on the mail ballots. There's so many different checks and balances, and that's why I think we have very good elections here in the state. And that's why it's also very hard for someone to violate the law.
Okay, let's move on to outrageous and/or kudos. Ed, what do you have this week?
My outrage is the bomb scare, the threats that were made against Temple Bethel just a couple days ago. You know, watching what's going on over in Israel and Hamas's attack. But it's, you know, we've got hatred here in Rhode Island. There's been a Pawtucket resident arrested, but it's, you know, the context is I just interviewed the head of the Jewish Alliance of Greater Rhode Island. He talked about a 250% increase in anti-Semitic threats in Rhode Island over the past year. So, you know, that to me is outrageous.
Angel, what do you have this week?
My outrage is related, and that is the vicious murder of Jews by Hamas. It's, to me, just simply outrageous what's happened. And I've read that it was the worst day in terms of deaths of Jews since the Holocaust, right? And that, to me, is something that we need to not forget. We need to focus on and remind ourselves we know what happened during the Holocaust, and we know how important it is that we be vigilant. It has been just outrageous what has happened, and every time I hear details, they just get worse.
Well, we're all parents, and you just think of what's going on.
Horrific,
So, yeah.
Right. I think we all agree with the outrage this week as to what happened at Peace Festival, that you saw people come in and just ceremoniously murder people and go into families' homes and kill parents in front of their children and then kill children in front of their parents. It is absolutely horrific.
I want to add one thing. She talked about going into homes, something that I didn't realize, but I keep hearing about. They have safe rooms. A lot of these homes have safe rooms. Think about that. We don't have
this
that
exact thing.
I mean, and I just thought about that. And I haven't visited Israel, so I didn't know this. But I mean, you start hearing over and over. I've heard that where some of the safe rooms worked and some unfortunately didn't, but that they were in safe rooms. That's how they construct their homes there, because of that fear. And so it's just really outrageous that anyone has to go through this.
And just to bring it back to Rhode Island, you know, if you go to a synagogue or the Jewish Community Center, you'll see security there. You know, and it's an unfortunate reality.
It's sad. Folks, thank you. That is all the time we have. Sorry we have to end on such a somber note. Ed and Sue and Angel, always good to see you. Folks, if you don't catch us Friday at 7 or Sunday at noon, we are all over social media. We archive all of our shows at ripbs.org/lively. We're on Facebook and Twitter. And apparently we have a pretty popular podcast. So if you are out and about and you just want to listen to my mellifluous voice from week to week, take us with you. Folks, we'll be all over what happens over the course of the next week. Maybe we'll have a new House Speaker, maybe not, but we'll be here to analyze it. We hope you have a great week and come back next week as a lively experiment continues.
A Lively Experiment is generously underwritten by...
Hi, I'm John Hazen White Jr. For over 30 years, A Lively Experiment has provided insight and analysis of the political issues that face Rhode Islanders. I'm a proud supporter of this great program and Rhode Island PBS.